I'm honestly so excited to talk about this because, well, first of all, I will say, welcome to QTV. Do I have lipstick on my teeth? I'm going to be checking that a lot. My
Okay. No,
co-host
you're good.
today is basically my co-host, Michelle Embree, tarot expert and teacher, author, website haver. I don't know. I didn't make a list. I'll do a better intro for you sometime.
I love it. That's great. I do have a website. It's true.
I went to it the other day and I was like, this is a beautifully designed website.
Well, thank you very much.
You're so
I appreciate that.
Today we're talking about this book.
Yes.
Nice. My copy, I got it
That's
from
beautiful.
like a thrift store. But the thing is, like this whole bottom half was like disgustingly wet and I had to pry apart all the pages. And I honestly think I probably got like a little cold from how moldy it was. But I feel like it just added to the experience of the book.
Yeah. I can see that. Yeah, I can understand that. Awesome. Yeah, well, should I just start talking about it?
Yeah, let's fucking do this.
All right, sweet. Okay, so this is Hollywood Babylon by Kenneth Anger, and that is Jane Mansfield on the front. And I love this little paperback copy. It's actually sewn in there, like kind of old school. This is a 1975 paperback. Which was well read when it was given to me, and I've actually read it a few times, and I read it again just this past couple of weeks, so it's super fresh in my mind. So let me talk about Kenneth Anger for a moment. Kenneth Anger was born in 1927 in Santa Monica, California. He has been an underground artist like his whole life. Like he talked about making his first film when he was 10, which was Ferdinand the Bull with a couple of his friends. Never been seen, but I love how he promotes it as like he's a wonderful at promoting himself, and he's a wonderful artist in all of these ways. So if anyone out there, if you're practicing any kind of occultism or Dada or surrealism, which you probably are, you owe if you've been an American in the last 100 years, that's really going to be where you're coming from. And you owe a great debt, honestly, to Kenneth Anger, my opinion. So he was born Kenneth Engelmeyer. All of these are my opinions. I shouldn't have to say that, but I will. He's most really well known for a film called Lucifer Rising, which was done in 1972. And by the time we kind of get to the end of talking about this, you will see why that's really such an important film. But it's 28 minutes long. You can find it on YouTube, and it's gorgeous. I mean, absolutely gorgeous.
Ooh, I'm totally gonna watch that today. I should have watched it.
What's that?
I haven't seen it yet. I wish I had watched it before we did this, but I'm gonna watch it today.
You will watch, yeah. Oh, you'll love it. It's 28 minutes, and you know what? It's perfect. And I want it, all of you, when you go watch it, I want you to really think about where not only the ideas in the film come from, but just like his sets and his lighting and his costume and his positioning of things. And like, I just really couldn't think more highly of Kenneth Anger. And also his writing, I think, is really terrific. And anyone who's taken any of my writing workshops, I'm always passing off some Kenneth Anger writing, which is unusual because he's considered a tabloid writer, which we're going to get into. So he does this pretty sensational kind of tabloid type writing. But I think what's really beautiful about it is that it's really very artful and very funny. Kenneth Anger is incredibly funny. And I think if you miss that point in his writing, you're going to miss a lot about what I think is really beautiful about his writing. And really wonderful and really artistic. I think one of the reasons...
He nails the like alliteration tabloid thing. I'm like, this is like every other paragraph is like all these like alliterative like quips, and they're funny. Yeah, he's like clearly some genius, if you can come up with
Yes.
stuff.
Absolutely. And so many, like, his reason for using some of this sensationalism really is to get attention, and really is to get his work put out into the world, because it may not otherwise have been. He's widely understood to be one of the first fully out gay men in Hollywood and behind the scenes in Hollywood, and hobnobbing with those people. Of course, there were plenty of gay people there's gay people everywhere. There's always been gay people everywhere. But being out and being visible is another thing. And he always was. I don't think he was ever like even in the closet. Like, he was always out. And so that was something that was unappealing. And to the establishment, they didn't want to. Being queer, Valentino was queer. There were all of these queer marriages of conveniences for both gay and lesbian men and women, right? Bisexual men and women, whatever, all these things are going on, but you were supposed to like get married and do the thing, whether you were being a Hollywood on-screen star, whether you were writing behind the scenes, you were a newspaper person, whatever, a school teacher, a firefighter, whatever, you were supposed to hide that stuff. And Kenneth Anger was like, yeah, no. Which also kind of gives some of you of the reasoning behind why he wasn't really that into keeping people's secrets, which is what I want to get to here about Hollywood Babylon. Because if you look it up on Wikipedia, which I hope you do, I enjoy using Wikipedia. I'll be bringing it up several times here, but just so we are clear, I consider Wikipedia to be the really like the safe, what do you call it? Like the above ground. This is generally what people think about anything, and it probably doesn't really get to the point on most things. But anyway, anytime I find something on Wikipedia, I'm like, there you go. Like that's the tip of the iceberg. That's the least you're able to know about this, right? No different with Kenneth Anger. So you'll get into like, it really wants to tell you, Wikipedia really wants to tell you that what Kenneth Anger has to say about Hollywood is all made up. It's all sensational. It's, and even some of the stuff on there seems a little angry. Like there's apparently no truth in what Kenneth Anger has to say, right? And I'm like,
Wow,
and there's
naive, but I like literally did not question one thing in this book. I was just like, I knew it.
Exactly.
Because I live in New Orleans and I'm like very used to people just being able to like do their freaky free love thing, and even though in this it's like actually extremely evil and horrible, but I'm not surprised. I wasn't shocked at all that it existed, even though the stories
right.
were really shocking.
Right. The stories in it are shocking, and again, like I came up on this stuff. Like I knew these kind of Anger stories, I don't know, for decades at this point. Like to me, they're definitely the definitive of what Hollywood is. I mean, saying that Hollywood and rock and roll is like debauched and propped up by rich people, like, am I really saying something that people don't know? Maybe I am. To me, that doesn't seem that way. But at any rate, when you really look at the meat of what's in Kenneth Anger's book, when you really look at its core, you start to kind of understand why people are so quick to want to say that it's all bullshit. And I think that, he has flourishes in it, which I'll get to. Some of them I can see, and some of them I'm not seeing. So it's fair to say that some of the things in the book are not specifically true. Which is also, right? Which is also like, it's kind of a truth teller's protection in a way. Even like, all right, I didn't know I was going to go here, but even like the parables, like in the Bible, like, or the parables in Buddhism, but even Jesus spoke, in parables. And one of the reasons being, however you see the life or not, or the fiction of Jesus, whatever the case may be, the point being is that he's a character who's a truth teller That's supposedly what's going on in the story. And he puts it in parables because they're going to kill him for telling the truth, right? So you can always say, hey man, it's just a parable. Hey man, it's just a tabloid. Something else I want to say about the time period that Kenneth Anger is writing Babylon. You have that's what you have tabloids. Tabloids for us, they turn in. What's that?
When did this book come out, or when was
Okay, so it was first published in France in 1959. It was published in the United States in 1965, but it was banned 10 days later and was not published again until 1975. So actually the last essay in it is like if you got the French edition, you wouldn't have the last essay, wouldn't even be in there. So technically he ends the story somewhere in 1957, 58. And for the first edition, but it was banned for 10 years in the United States. I mean, really, why? If it's really literally just a bunch of BS, like, we love BS, like we love fiction. Why not publish it as fiction? Why ban it? Okay. That's another thing I want to say. All right. So the time period that he's writing in, like tabloids for my generation, like National Enquirer, Weekly World News, things like that. They had Bat Boy, and they had, like, here's a leg that got it was amputated and it hopped down the street, right? They were ridiculous things, right? Because by the time I was coming up, you had television, and you had cable television, and you had magazines, and you had all of these things. So tabloids to compete now sensationalized Hollywood stories were not really doing it. You had that everywhere. You had People magazine, you had Time magazine. Time magazine does it, right? So back in the day of the tabloid, it was more like People magazine, or it was more like Time magazine. It's a freaking tabloid, right? That's not news, right? So anyway, I also want to say that about the time period. So he's doing this tabloid writing, which in the time period is not necessarily untrue. Okay, so that's Kenneth Anger. And that's okay. So let me get into one of the first stories in this story that kind of illustrates what I want to say. If you look at kind of over at the memory, if people even remember Fatty Arbuckle anymore, I doubt they really do.
You go to film school like I did. You definitely fucking learn about that. I want fat people to win, but not fat rapist murderers. I want them to fucking lose everything.
Right. And so, like, Fatty Arbuckle brutally raped and murdered Virginia Rapp. We won't even get into like what he actually did to her. It's horrific, right?
It's really
but and he was run out of Hollywood for that. Like, they didn't keep him around and completely cover it up. But like, let's also remember, like, he didn't totally take the full rap for it. And if you like hear if you hear a lot of people that say, oh, well, Fatty Arbuckle had that sexual scandal that ran him out of Hollywood.
I did not learn about this in school, which is really weird to me because I did learn about all of these people in obviously a completely different context. But then Buster Keaton still stayed his friend and was advocating for him. And Buster Keaton is still seen by people as this like tortured genius. And I'm like, I'm over you, fucking rape apologist, piece of shit. And anyways, that it was wild to me, like reading this and realizing how much I didn't know, especially because there's photos of everything.
There's photos. It's exactly right. And the other tabloids of the time were carrying the story of what he had done, which is my point about the tabloids. So your big, like your paper of record, the New York Times and things like that, they're not carrying this. The memory of Fatty Arbuckle, although his career was ruined, nobody wanted to be around him, his memory wasn't ruined. And I think that's what we get over in Kenneth Anger, who's telling us the truth. And he's telling us the truth that a lot of people knew at the time, okay? And so we'll get into some more stories like that. But anyway, that's where I love Kenneth Anger, and that's where I take him as a truth teller. And so when he does have, you know, and like there's there's the woman, like I'm not going to get too much into this story, but it's one of his flourishes where like, oh, her Dachshunds had chewed on her. Well, that probably isn't true. That part probably isn't true, that her Dachshund.
Oh, you don't think that's true? I was staring at
Well,
that photo and I was like, is that arm actually a nub eaten by dogs?
well, okay, so we don't know for sure, but let's just say this. If it's not true, the way that he uses that sensationalized bit, well, her Dachshunds chewed on her, and then he goes into this, what's beautiful about his work and his writing is he says, but Hollywood was always into cannibalism. Like Hollywood always cannibalized itself. So even where you can find a flourish in his stories, he's usually using it as this kind of wink, wink. Here's what I'm actually talking about, right? Yeah. Okay.
So horrible, though. I'm reading this book just like, not the dogs.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, with bite marks. So
it could be. It could be, but even if it isn't,
I'm looking at the picture right now. I was about to.
He's well, even if it isn't true, you get my point about where his flourishes go and how I feel like you can take his writing for truth and then also have this, like, you know, this kind of like, or, you know, who knows, right? Protecting himself kind of thing. Okay. So, this is, oh, I think I already told you this. Here, let me tell you how it gets described, because this is from Wikipedia. And so they say it was first published in the US in 1965. It was banned 10 days later and was not republished until 1975, which is the copy I have here. And upon its second release, the New York Times said of it, if a book such as this can be said to have charm, it lies in the fact that here is a book without a single redeeming merit. Which Kenneth Anger must love that. I mean, he must love that. He must be like,
so.
You're right. Right. I hope so too. But it just seems like his personality, because you can see if you are interested, you can see lots of Kenneth Anger interviews on YouTube. You can hear him talk. He's amazing. He's really charming. Yeah, pull him up. And so then the Daily Beast described Anger's book as essentially a work of fiction. There is no doubt that many, if not all, of the stories Anger shares in this slim Bible have no merit, right? And film historian Kevin Brownlow repeatedly criticized the book, citing Anger as saying his research methods was mental telepathy mostly, which I also love, because one of the things that we want to keep in mind about Kenneth Anger is that he is he's in the Church of Thelema. He's a Crowley student, right? So to say that that he has
with literally with Crowley himself.
Well, that's a good question. I kind of bet they have met. I would bet that, but I'm not gonna. That doesn't come up today in my talk.
That's just what I was.
But I kind of bet that I would. If I had to guess, if I had to go Kenneth Anger on it, I would say most definitely. So for someone to say it's mostly mental telepathy, I also think that's a high magnitude of compliment. So anyway, that's what was being said at the time. All right, so as we plunge into this book here from the beginning, I want to say something about, because this starts at roughly, the first thing we're going to talk about in Hollywood here, it happens in 1916. But I want to say something about that we may not think about very often. The 1890s were called the gay 90s in the United States, and they were called the naughty 90s in the UK. So during that period of time, you had people were they were partying a lot, and they were opening up. Sexuality was opening up. Feminism. You had the suffragettes were in swing in both countries, particularly in the UK. They started in the UK before they came here. So you had this kind of wild time. And one of the things that I want to say about that is it's during that time, the late 1800s, is when enterprise or mercantilism, which are the precursors economically to capitalism, they're peaking. And the point of capitalism is to create a surplus. Well, it's really in the late 1800s that this surplus enters the society in such a way that now everyone has disposable time. Not everyone at all, by no means. I'm sorry, I don't mean to say that. A very particular class of people, let me say that, suddenly have free time. And they suddenly have money to spend in free time. So they have leisure time. The leisure class, for the first time, really, is trickling down, right? So it's not just kings and queens that have this, right? It's not just this royalty that has this. Now you're starting to have the children of industrialists, right? They're enjoying this surplus. So by the time you get to 1916, okay, you're talking about the second generation of people enjoying, white people essentially, enjoying a surplus from capitalism. And at this point, they're, okay, this is my own kind of foray into where we're getting. I think it's important because I think all of this comes down to that, okay?
The backstory is laid, okay?
Right. So you're the children really of the first, like, Victorian. The Victorians were those people were depraved, right? You know, these white Victorians were like, you know, they were all buttoned up on the outside in the outside world, but inside
those petticoats, baby.
What's that?
Look at those petticoats.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So these are their children. They're entering into now Hollywood. You have pictures. You have the silent film era is underway, and really just getting its stride. Like the first actual theater that was dedicated just to cinema opened in 1905 in Pittsburgh, interestingly enough. And so you're just like 1916.
I have to sidebar for a second, okay? Because this only furthers my longtime theory that Pittsburgh is a gateway to hell, okay? That's all I have to say, please.
Yeah, you're probably right. You're probably right. This definitely proves it. So, right. Okay, so 1916, and there's a film, you can watch this on YouTube also, but it's called, The Mystery of the Leaping Fish, and it's about 12 or 15 minutes long, right? It's a silent film. I think it was really indicative of the era in this way because the lead character is Detective Coke Anyday. That's his name, Detective Coke Anyday. Because these early films, like, yeah, there's a big jar on his desk that says cocaine, and there's a big jar behind him that says dope. And he's answering the phone and like, or whatever, I don't know if there's a phone, that's kind of the wrong, whatever it is, he's at his desk and this guy comes in, you know, he's doing things, he's working is my point. And he keeps stopping now and he's shooting up, you know, and at some point he goes and he passes out and this girl is trying to give him, you know, like CPR or whatever, and because she's like, oh no, and then she realizes there's something in his pocket and she pulls it out and it's a syringe. And so she shoots him up in his eye, in his eyeball, and then he sits up, you know, and he's like, hey, and he's back in the game, right? So like these are what this early silent films, if you really look at them, this is what they're doing. Detective Coke Anyday, they're snorting coke, they're shooting dope. I mean, she finds a syringe and is like, oh, that's what's wrong with him, and shoots him up in his freaking eyeball, you know, right? And he's back in the game. Detective Coke Anyday. So that's a film that comes out in 1916.
What is it?
It's called The Mystery of the Leaping Fish, and it's about 15 minutes long, I think. But Anger, this is what Kenneth Anger says about it. He says, in 1916, dope could be the subject of a comedy. The year of that film, The Mystery of the Leaping Fish, English drug expert Aleister Crowley passed through Hollywood, taking note of the natives as the cinema crowd of cocaine-crazed sexual lunatics. Those were the days. That's what Anger writes about, right? It's like, those were the days. Good times, right? But Crowley...
Kenneth wasn't born then. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, he wasn't born yet. So, but at this point, he's noting what Crowley says in 1916. Crowley, who's an English drug expert, which I looked again on Wikipedia, and I was like, oh, he is actually known for being like an expert in drugs. And so, and he wrote all kinds of like erotic fiction that Hollywood apparently really liked also. Okay, so Crowley, we're not going to talk about Crowley as much today as we might in the future, because he really, this is his thing, man. Hollywood and rock and roll can really, in so many ways, be ascribed to. What's that?
I have opinions.
Okay.
We can say.
Okay. So, but Crowley, having seen these people, said the cinema crowd of cocaine-crazed sexual lunatics. So this drug expert, this writer of erotica, right? He comes and he sees this American Hollywood scene.
These guys are a little much, even for me. The literal drug and sex expert.
Right. Aleister Crowley's like, damn. Okay. So just to put that out there. So we're going to talk about Hollywood a little bit too here. So Hollywood itself was established as a municipality in 1903. But the famous Hollywood sign, I like to talk about the Hollywood sign because I think it's really important. But the famous Hollywood sign itself was not erected until 1923. So when Crowley is like, damn, you sexual lunatics sure like your drugs over here. Who knew, right? We don't even have a Hollywood sign yet. And I'm going to take this back in a second to some things Dave McGowan said from our last talk, okay? So Hollywood is at this point, it is a part of LA. It's been incorporated, but we don't have the sign yet. So like as Anger says, you know, Crowley's behind, this is the halcyon days of the early cinema. This is, I would imagine, again, here I'm using my imagination, I would imagine that there's people who are saying, oh, well, you know, it's a fad, right? This is what these kids are doing. Mm-hmm. Like, they might not even realize that this is going to become an art form, because I don't think at the time that it really is. Like, these people are, right? I don't think that there's any
the first movie stars.
These are the first movie stars, right? So the Hollywood sign originally read Hollywood Land. So it had all those extra letters on it.
13
and it was 13 letters, right? So it was cost $21,000 to build. And the point of it, which would be, according to Wikipedia, would be about $320,000 in 2019. So that would be quite a bit of money to us. Okay, so it cost $21,000 to build, and it was erected by a syndicate of developers, one of whom was Harry Chandler, who was the owner of the LA Times. I find that very important as we're going to tie this in with Project Mockingbird, Project Paperclip, and MK Ultra. So let's just bookmark Henry.
Let's see how it all connects. I'm very excited.
To Harry Chandler, who was part of building the Hollywood Land sign. And what it was for was they were doing a new real estate development. It was a residential neighborhood called Hollywoodland, and this was a advertisement for that residential area, which was segregationist. So there was right. So it was only white people could live there, and there was some very distinct wording. You can look more into the Hollywoodland sign and development, but there was some very distinct wording that made it impossible for I know, look at your face, for anyone but white people to live there. So I always feel like that's important anytime I see, because like the Hollywood sign, is on, it's in our movies, postcards, any kind of pop art is going to include this sign, which every time you see it, I think everyone should remember what they're looking at. You're looking at a symbol of a deeply, deeply anti-Black racist society and industry, what stems up around the Hollywood industry, right? We should just understand what our symbols are. We can, people want to say, oh, well, these were the times and those were the times. That's fine. That's fine. You're right. But
Take them
also
all down. Take them all down. Take them
pretty
down.
much.
Yeah,
And
it's just like a
at
weird
least
like rewrite history,
right. And at least if we're not, because this gets into some stuff with the MK Ultra and all this other stuff, Bernays, just these other ideas of psychology. For us to understand what the symbols we're looking at actually mean is one of the best ways to depower them. So we're all looking at this racist symbol among hundreds of racist symbols, but this is just another one. So anytime you see the Hollywood sign, please recall what it actually stands for.
I have no idea. I mean,
exactly.
now
you do.
Hollywood was racist and horrible and white supremacist, but it's just when it's really like, oh, by the way, this Hollywood sign was an advertisement for a white-only development.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
God damn it! What the?
I know. So just know it. It's important to know it. I think.
Thank you for educating me on that.
You are so welcome. So the other thing is it was built to last for a year and a half. It was only supposed to be there for 18 months. And we'll come back to it again.
So almost 100 years?
Yeah. So, it's almost 100 years old. But we'll come back to it. I have more to talk about with that Hollywood sign. But from our last talk, when we talked about Dave McGowan, and you remember his math where he said, as a white person, you have about a 1 in 365 chance of being murdered, unless you live in Laurel Canyon, during the 1920s, which is what we're about to talk about. Because what he said was, he did a death toll before all the bloody stuff happened in the 1960s in Laurel Canyon. He's like, actually, Laurel Canyon already had a history of suicide and murder going back to 1920s film. And so you had a lot of, because Hollywood land, right, it doesn't even exist yet, really, right? It gets built in 1923. So anyway, a lot of these people are living in Laurel Canyon. That's where their houses are. And Dave McGowan's math was, as a white person, you had about a 1 in 365 chance of being murdered unless you lived in Laurel Canyon, in which case it was 2 out of 4. So like literally, according to Dave McGowan, at least, in his book, Weird Scenes from the Canyon, he's saying like half of the white people who live in Laurel Canyon get murdered. And most of them were in the 20s were Hollywood stars. Interesting, right? I mean, it's just interesting. What does it mean?
Buck wild there, okay?
It's like, buck wild in the canyon.
I would have liked to party, but I don't like the murder, okay?
I know. And just like, by the end of the 60s with Dave McGowan's, book, like everybody got scared. They were like, oh my God, like decades of this place is so bloody, So anyway, onward to the 20s. But again, like I said, as we talk more in these sessions and these talks we have, which are awesome, we'll talk more about Crowley and what he really has to do. Like, I just really feel like that quote from Anger is the first time that like Crowley sees what's possible in America and what's possible with Hollywood. And I think that he starts to have some influence on that, which, again, I'm not going to get into a lot here, but I do want to say this. where his ideas about a new age, which you've heard me talk poorly about before,
No.
right? So, but that's very much Crowley. That's very much an Aleister Crowley idea. The age of Horus, and he says, through the 20s, 30s, and 40s, Crowley talks about wanting to bring on the age of Horus, to bring on the new age, perhaps the age of Aquarius. I don't know. I mean, it fits, right? If we're talking about hippies as being a creation, right? So, but all of this is coming. This is an aside, but I think it's important. So, all of this Crowley stuff is coming from Helena Blavatsky, which I might not be. I think I'm pronouncing it right. Blavatsky. She was a Russian occult philosopher. Who started the Theosophical Society in 1875, which is the year Crowley was born, and he always thought that was meaningful because that's when she started her society. And then she was the leader of Theosophy, which is an esoteric religion, which is continued on. Okay, she's basically where Crowley gets most of his ideas is from Blavatsky. Okay, which he turns into the OTO. All right. So, but it's carried on in the U.S. through Rudolf Steiner, who is the guy who made the Waldorf schools. So you probably know someone. I know at least 2 people personally who went to the Waldorf schools. So both of those schools are born from the teachings of the woman who was essentially Crowley's teacher. Putting that out there.
I'm just absorbing.
Okay.
I don't know what to say.
Right. Okay. So by the time Crowley comes through Hollywood and he sees all of these things, these metaphysical ideas, these spiritual ideas are very popular. Coming out of that age of the gay 90s, where I'm saying, people had this surplus. They were doing lots of drugs, the Victorian people, under their petticoats, like we said, right? But they're having seances. Spirit photography is very popular. Divination is very popular.
Spirit photography?
Spirit photography. There's another thing you can see online. That's something that 30 years ago we couldn't get our hands on, but people love doing what they considered spirit photography, where they were their ancestors would appear behind them, and there's some brilliant charlatans who were out there, and they would make sure those ancestors were back there, and no, their shit's really interesting, and and it's just like the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? Because now we have Photoshop. It's just like, right. So charlatan photographers, they didn't go anywhere. They just got better equipment. So all of these things are popular, and Crowley is known for saying that he wanted to usher in the Aeon of Horus, essentially the New Age, and he's a proponent of this Dionysian kind of living, which goes back to Greece and Plato and all those people. They talked about Apollo and Dionysian. Those were their gods. He's super into this. Hollywood is big time into this. Okay. So anyway, right. And this is like, again, Dada, surrealism. All of these things are happening, and all of these things are going together. And I think you can really see, that's definitely the roots of my own artistic, philosophical, and spiritual life. Really go back, apparently, to Blavatsky. They go back certainly to Dadaism and surrealism. American culture is embedded in these things. Do we know it? Do we understand it? Do we approve? Is it necessarily good, necessarily bad? I don't know. But we are rooted in these things. Our popular culture is rooted in these things. For better, for worse, I don't know. Again, let's just know about it. We might as well know about it. So, anyway, my notes here, I'm saying, unless you're reading the Old Testament and contemplating Greco-Roman sculpture, you're engaged psychologically with everything we're talking about. Like, unless, you know what I mean? Like, unless you just really, you don't have anything to do with popular culture or politics or capitalism, and then, unless you're doing that, you are a product of Blavatsky and Crowley. I don't know. That's just that's how it goes. So, your face is killing me. So,
you know, I don't know enough to say anything, so I'm just listening.
okay. Yeah, and like I said, these are all just, my opinions. But this is not my opinion. This is a fact. So in 1922, cinema gets its first morality board. Because,
Right.
these people are shooting dope in their eyes, right? So they get their first morality board, and it's headed by a man named William H. Hayes, and it's called the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, Inc. All right. It's the first essentially censor board. Now, Anger in his book, this is another reason why I think they don't like you to see this book. Anger in this book, he lists the people who are on this board. Now, so he not only describes and illustrates this gruesome underbelly in Hollywood, but he's naming these names of these politicians, these business moguls, these culture controllers who are working behind the scenes. So if you skip ahead to our own era, you can look up a documentary that's called This Film Is Not Yet Rated. It's probably about 10 years old at this point, maybe more like 15 years old. But if you check this documentary out, it'll kind of change your life if you grew up with any sort of cinema in your life. Because the ratings board, the people who censor our films nowadays, we don't know their names. The filmmaker, the documentarian who made this film, hired private investigators to try to find out who these people were. And it's been a long time since I've seen the film, but I feel like they didn't even succeed. And they were trying to follow them around in their cars that had black windows and trying to find out who these people were who are rating films. So that's how your film in this country gets whether it's
secret.
Well, that's the whole thing about it. And it's really a good film. This Film Is Not Yet Rated is really a good documentary. And part of the other part that's a secret that they talk about in the film is exactly what it is that gets your film a certain rating. They'll deny giving you if your film if it gets an X instead of an R rating, it can't go in theaters, right?
Right.
So and then if it's an R, it doesn't get these other kinds of promotion. It just these ratings are really important, not only to the financial success of your film, but to whether or not it gets distributed. So what makes the difference between an R and an X film is a secret that only the secret censors know. I'm only bringing this up. You can look at the film. This film is not yet rated. Watch the documentary. Maybe I remember it completely incorrectly, but I don't think I do. And my point is that it's another reason to want to censor Kenneth Anger and to want to say everything he's telling you is not true, because the original censors' names are in this book. It's other types of names that come up in these books. These politicians, these businessmen, and they're really bad doings. And so this is where I skip us ahead to that film. Plus, I think everybody should watch that film. Okay. So Hayes says, as he takes his position as the censor, right? Which Anger describes as, he comes from, President Harding's unfortunate cabinet. Okay. So I just love Kenneth Anger so much.
I know.
President Harding.
The dick was so
cabinet.
good.
Yeah. So that's where Hayes comes from. And what he says, one of the first things he says, is the potentialities of motion pictures for moral influence and education are limitless. So that's what I think, that's what I think Crowley is realizing. That's what I think other, so you have, on the one hand, you have these moralists who are from the Harding's unfortunate cabinet, who would like to use Hollywood to promote their brand of morality. And then you have other, I think you have other occultists. I think you have a lot of business people who are occultists at this point. Business moguls, people with money, people who want to promote an entirely different kind of lifestyle than maybe some of the buttoned up people in government. kind of see where I'm going with that. So, but everybody recognizes that that Hollywood is a vehicle for how you are going to think as a person in the world. Everybody realizes that Hollywood is going to be the organizer of the future and how we think and what our culture is going to be. Everybody recognizes that no matter what they want. And I think that they're all in on it in some way, in their own way, and they're all struggling to get their worldview to be what Hollywood produces. Okay. So, but the Roaring Twenties go on despite the censors, even though that's really the first time that there's 117 people are actually blacklisted by this first censor board, because we get that again in the 50s. But they're blacklisted by this very first censor board. So 117 people essentially they no longer are allowed to work.
For stuff that they're doing, it's not for anything they said in the movies. It's for how they're living their personal lives.
Good point. Yes, they are spied on.
So whack-a-mole, and it is just a way to control people. And I mean, not to get too off topic, but something we've talked about in all our videos, and like a huge point about this is basically just like trying to like psychically repress citizens, especially if like your government and the leadership is like using psychic powers basically to like oppress people, and they're preventing you from doing these things that kind of like naturally cause euphoria and like enlightened moments. Like there's like an agenda to that.
There's a huge agenda to it, and even I believe in even this first censor board, when they're spying on people's personal lives, it's a lot of what would be considered progressive movements, which are being stopped, right? So people who are gay people, gay men, lesbian women, whatever, are being censored out for what they do in their private lives.
Yeah.
So people, you have this censor board is going through people's trash, listening to their conversations.
Yeah. And they were partying in hotels at the time. So people could just spy on them at the hotels also.
Yes.
And they went from hotels to private homes, these elaborate private homes, basically just to avoid being spied on.
Good point. Yeah, good point. Very good point. Very good point. So that's, but it goes on. So let me just kind of show some things from this book also that I wanted to show. Let's see. What do I have here? Okay, so this is about Hayes, and he says, this is Kenneth Anger writing about Hayes, who's upholding this censor board. Hayes fever swept through the front offices. That means the front offices at the studios, right? The guys who write the contracts and things. Hayes swept through the front offices. The moguls had no illusion that the morals clause would get the colony to mend its ways. They launched an undercover investigation of everybody in sight and turned loose a frantic, competing horde of private eyes in Hollywood. Detectives used the whole bag of dirty tricks, from bribing servants to peering in windows, even primitive listening devices. When the reports came in, the front offices died a little. It was much, much worse than they had suspected. With the approval of Czar Hayes, a doom book was compiled with a total of 117 Hollywood names deemed unsafe because of their no longer private lives. Like, that's incredible. That's incredible. So anyway, that's the first wave of censorship. But like I said, the Roaring Twenties go on, and all kinds of really shitty things continue to happen. So one of the things that Anger does in this book, despite it seems like, he's quite a Charlie Chaplin fan. I think that because he treats Chaplin, he treats Chaplin pretty kindly, I think, but he also turns over the truth about Chaplin, which people didn't want to hear. I mean, I think Charlie Chaplin is one of the only people from this book that I think really tends to continue to be a hero to contemporary.
I know, it's insane to me. Like, Well, anyways, go on. But yeah, fuck that guy.
Right. Okay. So, and I mean, like, Chaplin, like, people love him. He came from this working class background. He did this working class thing, and like, he was anti-fascist and anti-authoritarian, and he's one of the only people to survive this, anti-authoritarian, or I'm sorry, this authoritarian wave that went through Hollywood. Chaplin continued to produce what's widely considered anti-authoritarian works.
Yeah, I guess it's okay to the censorship board if you're monogamous. It doesn't matter if you're monogamous with somebody you've been grooming since they were 7 years old.
Hello.
I'm gonna smash everything around me if I.
Right. Basically.
That was like one of the most upsetting things to read in this book. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Charlie Chaplin.
Well, and I think
this girl since she was 7 years old.
Yeah, which is the original like Lolita archetype. So, and she's not even the first. Yeah.
Huh? What did you say?
Well, and she's not even the first, so
she wasn't the last.
She wasn't the last. So Chaplin had this reputation. But Chaplin got through it, unlike Chaplin got away with a lot of things, unlike other people. And like continues to like really captivate his memory.
He wasn't maybe as much of like a drug user or a partier. He was just a pedophile.
He was a drug user and a partier though too. I think some of it's like the time period a little bit, because when we move ahead to Errol Flynn, which I'm just going to touch on real quick here, like Errol Flynn did lose his career later on, like in the 40s when he was caught like with all these teenage girls. The times had changed enough that he did lose his career. But I want to say one of the things that I want to say to people is something there's words that stick in our vocabulary that come from really shitty things, and so people will still say "in like Flynn," and that saying means getting your dick in a teenage girl. You're in like Flynn, because like Errol Flynn was known for being able to sweet talk teenage girls and fuck them. And so when people in contemporary people still use the phrase "in like Flynn," that's what it means. And so I'll just take this opportunity to throw in a couple of other ones. When we use the phrase rule of thumb, that actually comes from, it was a European king, I don't know which one, but at one point in time in his kingdom, he had said that you could only beat your wife with something no bigger around than your thumb. And that's where rule of thumb comes from. The concept of the biological clock also is not a reference to how many eggs you have. It's a reference to if the latest a woman can have a baby and not lose her mind is 24. And so that's your biological clock.
Sure,
and if you
it's true, honestly. I'm just kidding. But I'm like, get those babies the fuck away from me. You know what? I'm lighting the joint. I'm stressed.
So just know that if somebody's talking about their biological clock, if you're over 24, you're already done. You're crazy. So you're not. That's rule of thumb and Flynn. I just thought I'd throw those in there. But for Chaplin, it's happening more in the 20s, and even though he's being taken to court for a couple of things, he manages to get through that.
So all the time. Like,
yeah, all the time.
Wives sue him, and so many of his wives were like, he forced me to get abortions multiple times.
Yeah, I mean, the story of Joan Barry is really very sad, and it comes after. So let me talk about Lolita for a minute. So Lolita, he meets Lolita when she's 7, and her mother is a server at this restaurant, and Lolita hangs out there at the table, catches Chaplin's eye for the love of God, and he starts grooming her basically at that time. Now, her mother's throwing her under the bus.
Since he was 2 years old is 7 now. And I'm like, that's literally a baby. That's a baby. That's a baby child.
Yes. Where do I have that? Yeah, no, it is. I mean, so okay, I'm not going to read that. I'm going to go past that. So anyway, also, you know, to be said is that her mother is there, but she's, you know, she's kind of in on this thing. You know what I mean? Like she's getting, you know, Lolita starts to get parts and things because of Charlie Chaplin. Her mother's kind of the original like stage mother in this whole thing. But by the time Lolita is 16, she marries Chaplin. She's already pregnant. She's 16. He's
Yeah, they have to
29.
go to Mexico. Wait, how old is he?
He's 29. She's 16. He's been grooming her for almost 10 years or 11 years at that point. She's already pregnant. So we don't really know. I mean, like their first date, she was 14, I think. So that's Chaplin. That's Charlie Chaplin. So people, I don't think they like that. They don't want to hear this stuff about Chaplin. But so she winds up having 2 of his children, and there's a big court to do about it. He gets through all of it. He has to pay a good bit of money. A good bit of money is paid out to a Lolita, our original Lolita, our archetypal Lolita,
Her name
you
is
know, which
Lolita,
is
right?
her name is Lolita, and then when they
Lolita? I thought it was just. I thought it. Anyways, I don't know.
well, when she gets her own dressing room at the studio, it's apparently a tradition in Hollywood to that your name on the door is kind of a play on your name rather than actually your name. And so the name on her door is Lita. And then they began calling her Lita Gray, which is actually the name
Oh,
Gray is the name of the cat that Chaplin gave her. So
right.
this became,
Okay.
right? But her full name is Lolita. And if you look at what we consider a Lolita to be, a Lolita as an archetype in our culture is a very young girl who seduces a grown man. So according to, which is coming from this archetype, she's the archetype.
And the
She's the
book too.
original.
The book must have come out after that. I'm assuming.
Yeah, I mean, there was I forget the woman's name who wrote that book.
No, it
And
was
I have never.
Lolita, right?
Right. But this is the original. This is the original Lolita. So anyway, she's 7. Anyway, putting that out there. So
1955. That
Chaplin continues on with this behavior, you know, even after Lita has the kids and the money and they're gone. He marries somebody else who's very young.
he must have had like over 20 children.
I believe it. I mean, I believe it.
Yeah.
You can, yeah, you should look that up because I did not look up how many children he actually has. But yeah, I mean, I absolutely believe that.
It says
So,
but I bet it's way more than that.
so, and then eventually, so Anger calls him. Anger refers to him as Chicken Hawk Charlie. So, like, I actually really appreciate that because people want to cover over what Chaplin actually did and who he actually was. So Anger calling him repeatedly, like, and then you got Chicken Hawk Charlie is actually like, you know, like I said, I think Anger is pretty kind to Chaplin compared to some of the other people in this book. But he does call him Chicken Hawk Charlie, and he does talk about Joan Barry, which I think is one of the most terrible stories because he's, you know, she's an adult by the time you know she starts hitting it with Charlie. But he gets her pregnant twice, and he doesn't want to go through what he went through with Lolita. So they're telling her that they're going to give her, you know, a Hollywood career, that she's going to have a Hollywood career. And they've got her on this, you know, weekly salary of $75, you know, which isn't much money considering what Chaplin was taking in, considering what the studios were taking in, and considering that they were getting her to have these terrible illegal abortions,
Yeah. Not.
back alley abortions, because it was convenient for Chaplin, and so they were leading her on and telling her, well, like, you're on the payroll. Well, you can't do this if you're pregnant, right? They're leading her on through 2 abortions that we don't really know that she wanted to have necessarily. And then they reduce her paycheck to $35, and then they just, phase her out. And so I just think the Joan Barry story is just terrible. It really, I find it very upsetting.
And Chaplin at this time, like, for comparison, they were making thousands of dollars a week. It was like
yes,
75, and the other people are getting thousands of dollars.
Thousands of dollars. Yes. Hollywood stars.
Her, it's horrible. And to think that he was, just because of who he was and how he was posturized, he was able to do this to woman after woman after woman, and they're all so fucking beautiful.
Yeah. Yes. And I really think that Anger is the one person who really talked about this, who really put this out in the world. Throughout this, I know, throughout this book, I feel like Anger has these things to say about these Hollywood starlets that other people didn't say. I really, like, he really is like, well, for her part,
he honors these women just by making them more complex than everybody was doing at the time, by just saying they were, like, basically just, like, stupid women with no blah blah. He really gives
gold diggers.
Yeah, and he gives them the dimensions that
Agreed.
is real.
Agreed. Which is like just that thing that I heard on a talk he was giving, and yesterday I was listening to this, and somebody asked Kenneth Anger. They said, "Well, I told you this yesterday," but they said, "What did you think of Mulholland Drive?" And he said, "Oh, I hated it. I hate when straight men want to watch lesbians. Lesbians don't have sex like this." He's like, it can be quite brutal, really. Like, I was just like, yes.
Wait, he was talking about Mulholland Drive, the movie?
Yeah, he was talking about the David Lynch film.
So funny. I misunderstood what you were saying.
Yeah. Somebody asked him because David Lynch, is probably very much takes his a lot of his creativity from Kenneth Anger. He's really, he's one of those underground artists that all of these mainstream artists took their cues from, right? And so somebody
definitely can see that. I mean, I've been a Lynch stan for a long time, and I've never really known about Kenneth Anger, so this is
right. Well, and that's why somebody asked him, and he was like, Kenneth Anger's just like, oh, I hated it, and I'm like, to the end, Kenneth Anger is going to tell you what he thinks about some shit, and also come in kind of on the side of like, I don't know how to tell you all people that women are people. I don't know when you're going to get it, but they are. And so like anyway, Hollywood Babylon's a good one for that. He puts all of these stories in here, and I think it's really important and beautiful. Okay, so now we're going to get to good old William Randolph Hearst. Right? Oh, that guy.
Went to college with his granddaughter.
You did?
She was in my film history class, and she like walked out of the screening of Citizen Kane because she was like, "This is about my family."
Was it his granddaughter?
It might have been his great granddaughter. Probably his great
granddaughter. Yeah,
whatever. That's great. She was so fucking rich, dude. She was so rich. She was the only person in the entire school who had a car on campus because we were in downtown Boston. So, anyways, I digress.
Right.
Just wanted to add that flavor.
So this is like great. Yeah, no, for sure. And especially since she's still at film school and you're still watching Citizen Kane and she's still walking out of it. Like
I thought I had a chance in the film industry when I was going to school with people who are literally the descendant of William Randolph Hearst. Who do you think's going to get the internship, Kallie? Anyway, that's why I don't film.
Yeah, well, and as we touched on when we talked about Manson, I also feel that the Patty Hearst kidnapping is related to MK Ultra. So again, we're putting these stitches
totally by that for sure.
Yeah, right. So, which is not to say that Patty herself was somehow in the know, but I do think that that using her was a point to be made. So anyway, okay, so William Randolph Hearst. Let me just read what we've got on good old Wikipedia for you before we hear the truth from Kenneth Anger. He was born in 1863 and died in 1951. He was an American businessman, newspaper publisher, and politician known for developing the nation's largest newspaper chain and media company. This gets really important later on in the MK Ultra stuff. Hearst Communications, which remains huge. So even though supposedly this guy lost his ass in the Depression, he did not lose his, yeah, exactly. He did not.
Richest kid at my college, okay?
No, I know. He did not lose Hearst Communications. So, and I question I mean, this guy was already born the heir of the silver mine fortune. So great granddaddy was already born rich. Okay. So what does it mean to lose your ass when you're like one of the richest people? I don't know. But anyway, supposedly he lost it. We'll get to Marianne Davies selling her jewelry for him. I don't know. Anyway.
I hate that, but yeah, we'll get to it.
I will get to it. So the Hearst Communications, his flamboyant methods, this is important too, of yellow journalism influenced the nation's popular media by emphasizing sensationalism and human interest stories. So like this guy really has a lot to do with the making of the way we have ingested media for the last 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
The structure of media is very much controlled by this horrible man, okay? He's really the one who set this up in so many ways. Okay, so Hearst sold papers by printing giant headlines over lurid stories featuring crime, corruption, sex, and innuendo. Still to this day, right?
Innuendo.
Acquiring more newspapers, Hearst created a chain that numbered nearly 30 papers in major American cities at its peak. He later expanded to magazines, creating the largest newspaper and magazine business in the world. Hearst controlled the editorial positions and coverage of political news in all his papers and magazines, and thereby often published his personal views.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. He sensationalized Spanish atrocities in Cuba while calling for war in 1898 against Spain. Historians reject his claims that he started the war with Spain. Anyway, but apparently that's a rumor. So, but he continues on, like that's taking us back to the era that I was speaking of, the gay 90s here and the naughty 90s in the UK. Hearst had these paper companies going between both of these places. He eventually comes to America, and he's part of the Hollywood scene. So he does politics a bit as a Democrat here. He's considered a progressive until right around 1918, and he began changing his viewpoint. And so here's this. After 1918 and the end of World War II, Hearst gradually began adopting more conservative views and started promoting an isolationist foreign policy. Now, this is our newspaper guy, okay? This is our newspaper guy. This is the guy who's putting his viewpoints, who historians, some say, started the Spanish War, apparently. Some people say that. So anyway, you're talking about a person who has an enormous amount of control over what we believe about history, okay? Yeah. So
especially at that time when
right.
where you're getting all your information. You don't have you don't have access to like a bunch of different news sources.
No, you don't. And so even though like he's an old man, younger people are reading it. They're picking up these viewpoints. We've been taught by the generations before us to hold viewpoints that were held by by William Randolph Hearst. There's no real way around that. Like, we don't, that's how it works. That's how information and history is disseminated, So, he starts promoting this. What's that?
I said I hate that.
I know, right? I mean, it has so much to do with our history books and, what we learn in college, what our parents learned, what we were taught. So he's promoting an isolationist foreign policy to avoid any more entanglement in what he regarded as corrupt European affairs. He was at once a militant nationalist, okay, which is Hitler was a nationalist. We're dealing with nationalists now. Okay. A fierce anti-communist. What?
I love that.
Right? Okay. These things, they go together. We're not.
Time is a flat circle, Keep reliving the same fucking timeline, Groundhog Day style, till we fucking figure it out, which is gonna be never.
Agreed. I'd like to get off this revolving door at the same time as Kenneth Anger, personally, but I'm just saying.
Oh,
So he was at once a militant nationalist, a fierce anti-communist after the Russian Revolution, and deeply suspicious of the League of Nations and the British, French, Japanese, and Russians. He was a leading supporter of Franklin D. Roosevelt. So, okay.
Wait,
so you can see
supporter of FDR?
Yes. He was originally a Democrat. And I mean, like, those things, if you look back in time, those parties actually flip-flopped at some point in time. And again, this takes us back to, there isn't really a straight line in any of this. Like, like you have different factions fighting for Hollywood. No single person really has one line of thinking. I mean, we just don't. We're influenced in all of these different ways. So looking at the big picture is, I think, the most important thing that we can do. And knowing what we're looking at and where it came from and how it might affect us, I think, is super important. So this guy's no outsider to the Hollywood game, though. So here's this newspaper guy. And at some point, he props up, he wants his own starlet. Right? He wants to have his own starlet. All the boys have their own starlet, Kallie, and Hearst wants his own. So he finds Marion Davies, who is exactly I know, and she's
adorable.
Here she is. That's Marion Davies.
She's so cute.
I know. So he decides that that was great. That'll be a great still. He decides that he's gonna prop her up in all of his newspapers and magazines, and he's gonna buy her into the studios and do all these things. She's exactly half his age. Not a teenager, though, thankfully.
She's in her 20s and he's in his 40s, 50s at this point.
50s. Like, it's exactly she's exactly half his age, but they're both grown adults at the time. So, props to fucking Hearst for that. But he was known to be very controlling of her, which I love this picture in the book. Here he is looking at her.
Oh yeah. Oh God, it's so creepy.
It's so creepy. So she throws these beach parties that everybody wants to go to, but the parties that people really want to go to, even more than Marion Davies beach parties, are they want to get on Hearst's yacht, the Juanita, the Anita. Juanita, I can't say it exactly right, but I know they named like a silverware company after it, which makes sense because they come from a silver family. Anyway, everybody wants to get on this yacht party and go, and this is the greatest thing that can happen to you if you're in Hollywood, is you get on the Hearst yacht party. Anyway, what happens one night, there's some party in What's the year? It'll come to me here. But it's in the 20s at some point in time. Where's the year? I think it's like 24. It's 1924 because that's when Ince dies. Okay, so they're all out on this yacht, and Hearst gets word that Marion has run off with who? Charlie, good old Charlie Chaplin, right? That may or may not be true, but Chaplin's on board, and somebody apparent, and that's it could be Anger, who's also just like, oh, there was that Chaplin, you couldn't trust him around any women, right? So that could be one of those Kenneth Anger flourishes. But at any rate, that's the story in Hollywood Babylon, is that somebody tells Hearst that Marion's somewhere making it with Charlie Chaplin. So so Hearst goes, he angrily goes, and apparently he's known for having, according to Anger, a diamond-studded revolver that he likes to just, as you're on his boat, he likes to just pull it out of his pocket and take down a seagull, to just kind of
that's
show
his thing to fucking do.
Right. And he apparently likes to surprise people with this. It's not like, come watch me shoot this seagull. Like, you'll just be on board and he'll whip it out of his pocket and be like, bam, apparently that's how Anger tells the story anyway. So apparently he goes and he gets his gun, and somehow this man who is a producer named Tom Ince, I-N-C-E, who was born in 1880, died November 19th, 1924 on Hearst yacht.
His birthday party also.
Well, it was his birthday.
It was his birthday party, yacht party.
Well, he died, and that was the last, let's see. Oh, yeah, okay.
Birthday.
Happy birthday. So it was his birthday party and he's a silent film producer, director, screenwriter, and actor. Getting very popular. Ince's untimely death was at the height of his career. And it says he became, supposedly the story surrounding it is that he had become, that he died of indigestion. Hang on, there's something I wanted to read from here. So supposedly he dies of indigestion, but there were people on the boat that say, I saw him leave with a bullet hole in his head. So, people really pointed at William Randolph Hearst. And here, this is from, but the case was dismissed. The police looked into it and the case was dismissed, which I cannot imagine being a cop who, is a civil servant, right, going up against William Randolph Hearst. I mean, I don't know that that's what you want to do when you're nobody, when you're a cop. You know what I'm saying? Hearst is going to have a lot more power than you. So, the police saying something is dismissed when you're talking about very powerful people, particularly in this time period. You can't really trust that, is what I mean. So anyway, it says Anger has this in his book. He says this dismissal left an editorialist of the Long Beach News dissatisfied. And this is what was in the Long Beach News. At the risk of losing something of a reputation as a prophet, the writer will predict that someday one of the scandal-scented mysteries in filmdom will be cleared up. Motion picture circles have suffered alike from scandal and rumors of scandal. Deaths from violence or mysterious sources have been hinted at but never proved. If there is any foundation for suspicioning that Thomas Ince's death was from other than natural causes, an investigation should be made in justice as the public as well as those concerned. So not everyone at the time believed it, and Anger clearly doesn't believe that he died of indigestion. Wikipedia says there were many rumors, but his death officially was heart failure. But that's Wikipedia for you.
There was something in the book that was somebody saw his body being taken off the boat with a bullet in his head.
Right. There were rumors. People said that they saw a bullet hole in his head. But that's it. We don't have any coroner's reports that say that. We don't have it right. So it's really just rumor and innuendo from a very powerful person. But here's something I want to say that I find very, very interesting. So the inside joke then in Hollywood is they start talking about William Randolph's Hearst, right? That's the joke. They start calling him William Randolph Hearst, right? And so here's my point that I'm going to throw out is like, if you've ever been a part of any community attached to an industry, you've ever been any part of an office environment, a community of artists, a church congregation, you know that those kind of the jokes are what's true. You know it. Like there's your boss is always doing something that you're like, oh yeah, that never happened. You know, when the outsiders, when the public's asking, right? But then when you're in the break room, you know, you're like, Randolph Hearst, whatever, right? So, like, that's where the fact that Hollywood then had this joke about his Hearst, it makes me really believe it just as an adult person who has experience in life at this point. Like, right? I have definitely told lies to the public about my boss on various jobs, you know what I mean? And then we're all wink wink, you know, in the break room. Like just as a person who knows how the world works, I know that inside jokes tend to be pretty truthful. So, and Kenneth Anger definitely goes with that idea also. So later it's said that, like I said, that he supposedly loses his ass in the Depression, and Marion Davies has to sell her jewels to like help him or whatever. But what does all
that? I am really not okay with that. I'm
right,
not okay with her doing that.
right. I'm pretty sure she probably sold her jewels, but if the hell, I just can't imagine what losing his fortune would look like. But he did hold on to Hearst Communications, which obviously made a full bounce back because his heirs are wealthy to this day. Obviously, you know one of them, right? So, so he didn't. Yeah, whatever he lost in the Depression, it all came back.
He got it all back. And he's the fucking reason that weed is illegal. So big ups to that guy.
Yeah, he's a jackass. Yeah, he's a jackass for sure. Okay, let's see. All right, so at this point we're up to, I'm jumping in here. We're gonna say, I'm gonna talk about Edward Bernays for a minute. So do you know that name?
Is it in the book? There's so many.
No, there's not. Edward Bernays is not in the book. Edward Bernays is I learned this, the double nephew. I didn't know you could have this, but his double uncle is Sigmund Freud. So, which means like, yeah, I had to look this up. So like if I had a brother who like married your brother, then my kids are your kids, my brother would be your kid's double uncle. Something like that. It's like Sigmund Freud's sister must have married Bernays' sister or something like that. So like it's his double uncle. I'm just saying.
Somehow. Gotcha.
You know what? If you look you got it. If you look, I typed double uncle into Google and it explained it to me, and I can see it in my mind, but I can't make the words right now.
Okay, a man who is one's uncle in two different ways. Example, a brother of one parent and a brother-in-law of the other. This is too confusing.
See, it's too confusing, but it's basically like somebody's brother married somebody's sister, and he's your uncle on both sides. Like your uncle, right? Because he's your father's whatever, right? So he's your uncle. But anyway, Sigmund Freud is Edward Bernays' double uncle.
Okay.
And so Edward Bernays, right, which is important to this. So he's an Austrian.
Kind of like incestuous-y seeming. Like you have to be a double uncle because like all y'all in the same polycule are marrying each other.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the same polycule. Yeah, exactly. And then like, you know, that's going to have a lot to do with like class and proximity and all of these things. So he's an Austrian American, Edward Bernays is, and he's a pioneer in the field of public relations. And in 1928, he's considered the father of public relations. There's a couple of pretty fresh documentaries about him. One is called, I believe, The Century of the South, which talks about Edward Bernays in advertising. Like, he's primarily something that he's known for is getting women to smoke cigarettes, because that used to be like you'd see these starlets smoking, and that was really outrageous, right? But Edward Bernays made it something that like just basic middle class, like church going ladies wanted to do, because he wrote on the backs of like getting the vote for women and feminism of that time, and he called them torches of freedom. And he's widely credited with making smoking something that women wanted to do and did in public. So, but in 1928, he he puts out his book, which is titled Propaganda. Okay, so I'm throwing Edward Bernays into the mix of this because his in public relations, and he has such an effect on us to this day. Who Edward Bernays is and what he did in his books on propaganda and advertising, completely altered like who we became, right? So, and he's showing up in these obviously Hearst has to be, I'm calling him Hearst too. Hearst has to be like reading Edward Bernays, and certainly Edward Bernays's work is going into Hearst's papers and his advertisements and his magazines, right? Everybody's reading this. Like, at this point in time, there is no such thing as public relations. Like, Edward Bernays essentially invents that. Okay, and so all these places are using public relations, and they're using advertising, and they're starting to understand that you can manipulate the public in this way using propaganda, right? And remember, this is like pre-Nazi Germany, where this shit gets really perfected and then brought back here. Okay, but he's from Austria. Bernays is from Austria, right? He's an Austrian American. Okay, so so Bernays was named one of the most influential Americans of the 20th century by Life magazine, which I'm going to take this moment to say something about Life magazine. Even Tom O'Neill touched on this in Chaos for a moment. Life magazine is long known to often be a cover paycheck for people who are doing actually work for the CIA. So CIA agents would often pose essentially as journalists for Life magazine, who were actually paying them, but they weren't actually working for Life magazine. They were working for the CIA. And so they would say, I'm an investigative journalist for Life magazine. Like I said, Tom O'Neill touches on that in Chaos a little bit, but I've heard it in other places. Life magazine is also, I want to throw this out there, since we were talking about spirit photography and Photoshop and all these things. The iconic photos in Life magazine, so many of them that we can see right now in our minds and may not even realize where they come from, many of them are posed. Life magazine is known for its photography over the course of, the last 100 years. And a lot of that stuff is complete bullshit. And it works with the way that we believe, like what we believe in. It works with what pulls our heartstrings, right? And it is Life magazine begins in 1936. And so it is post Edward Bernays' influence on publishing. I want to throw that out there because in our talks in the future, I will probably bring up Life magazine some more. But yeah, Life magazine faked a lot of pictures. So let's see. Yeah. So, okay. So Edward Bernays, he's most known for Torches of Freedom and also for his work with United Fruit Company, which is connected with the CIA orchestrated overthrow of the democratically elected Guatemalan government in 1954. Okay, that's Edward Bernays. He's already working for the CIA. We can put him working for the CIA. We know for United Fruit. Okay, so that's Bernays. So his books are Crystallizing Public Opinion, which came out in 1923. Propaganda came out in 1928, and gained special attention as early efforts to define and theorize the field of public relations. So yeah,
And help infiltrate Guatemala.
yeah, yep. Edward Bernays. He helped women to recognize they needed to smoke cigs, and he helped the CIA overthrow a democracy in Guatemala. Yeah. So, and his effects on how we think.
I have a rant inside me, but it's.
No, I mean, you can. The Century of the Self is a documentary. I mean, gosh, I mean, it's probably 20 years old at this point in time. But it's really about Edward Bernays and his like effect on like who we are. Edward Bernays has had a huge effect on who we are. Randolph Hearst has had a huge effect on who we are. Aleister Crowley's had a huge effect on who we are. And like, I just feel like this is the most important thing that we can say. And, you know, I mean, I feel like Kenneth Anger gave us something really special. Anyway.
Yeah, we
Definitely. All right. So, let me see if I'm going to look at this or not. I had some.
America would leave South America alone.
Right.
Well, my eyebrows look crazy if I pull them up like this.
Okay, so you go through, things really change. The stock market crash really changes people. It changes Hollywood. It changes society in all these ways. And then we move into World War II, which really changes things, changes society. Yeah. I mean, the Depression, I mean, I can remember my grandmother talking about like when you would go, the theaters were trying to get people to go. And so they would give you this this glassware. So you go in and like for each ticket, you'd get like whatever, a plate or a glass or something like that. And you would try to collect them all. Right. So, and they were really pretty stuff. And my grandmother had it, and it was probably full of lead, but that would be ways that they would try to get people to come in to the theater, was like, you know, you can, if you bring the whole family every week, you'll wind up with this, you know, beautiful set of like dishes for your dinner table or whatever. It was really beautiful stuff, but it changed the amount of money people were taking in. And then also, you're talking about marijuana becoming illegal. That's probably part of it too. You know, we go through prohibition during this time, which then turns in, that's prohibition of alcohol, which then that gets overturned. And then they have to make pot illegal just because there's a government agency that needs to do something. I mean, that's literally the only reason marijuana ever became illegal in the first fucking place. Is you had a government.
It really did have to do with, I think, the type of paper that William Randolph Hearst was printing on, and he didn't want hemp to be produced as a paper. But don't quote me on that because I'm just pulling it out of my very chaotic memory bank. So
well, that could very well be. I know Dow Jones wanted hemp illegal because they wanted the contracts to make military uniforms from synthetic fibers, and they had been made from hemp prior to that. So I absolutely believe that Hearst would get in on it too. Makes sense to me. But at any rate, you have morality changing. Reefer Madness was a very popular film that people believed, you know, which is really funny. You know, yeah, anybody. What's that?
I'm stoned right now.
Just for the record. But if anybody's never seen Reefer Madness, it's worth checking out, because here you had all these people who, you know, we're doing all kinds of crazy shit, but it winds up being Reefer Madness that gets popular. Why? You know, right? I mean, it winds up being like Reefer Madness. Anyway, so morality is changing at this point in time. Money is changing at this point in time. So we step into like World War II. at this point in time. All right, so now this is where I'm going to branch out. I'm going to start talking about some like this MK Ultra kind of stuff coming up. What we talked about before was MK Ultra really, you know, as a mind control experiments. This is what they're looking to do. The United States, when they start MK Ultra in 1953, officially, they're looking for a way to make a blank slate and control people's minds. We know that this is happening. Well, I guess we have to say we have real reasons to speculate deeply that it was happening in Germany, in Poland and Germany, and probably Russia during World War II, that these experiments predated anything official in the United States, right? So what you have happening now, going through this motion picture stuff that's happening, all this Hollywood stuff, everything that we've talked about up to this point, now let's take it to the end of like World War II. And so what's going on at the end of World War II? So for one thing, let me say this too. You have in 1932, Peg Entwistle commits suicide by jumping off of the Hollywood sign, which leads a lot of other people to do the same thing, and also brings us to another flourish, I think, in Anger's writing, because he says she dove off the 13th letter, you know, after she'd made like the 13th elevator or something. She'd made some film with the word 13 in it, kind of leading you to believe that she jumped off the D, but all reports that I can find would say she jumped off the H, which could also be considered the 13th letter, depending on which way you count. Okay, so like there's another kind of Anger thing, but you know, but that's fun.
That's not how you count.
I know, but so anyway, I think that's another little Anger thing, but he doesn't say she jumped off the D. He says she jumped off the 13th letter.
Yeah, he does. That's really funny.
Right? But I do believe it was the H. So it kind of, I think that's 1932, and I just feel like that's really this place where Hollywood changes, and this place where the world kind of changes. I think it really earmarks this part. So anyway, let's go back to post World War II. So what happens in 1947 is you have the anti-communist campaign, which is led by J. Parnell, who's in Congress. And the same year, it's 1947, and the same year, John Wayne, the Nazi, is elected president of the Motion Picture Alliance. So at this point,
he was a Nazi. I mean, I obviously believe it, but I didn't know.
I mean, you know, look into it. It's my opinion. I'm not the only one who holds it. But he certainly has some Nazi-ish beliefs. So he's elected president of the Motion Picture Alliance. And let's see, I marked some page here. 357. What did I say? So John Wayne is elected president of the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals. That's what it's called. Okay. So anyway, that's happening in 1947. So now you're having another run through Hollywood. This is where they get Lillian Hellman and Dashiell Hammett and Donald Trumbo. This is where you get the blacklisting for the Red Scare that runs through Hollywood. And it's coming out of this Motion Picture Alliance. So here's your new whatever you want to call it. They did it in 1920. They're doing it again. And the blacklist is terrible. I mean, I think a lot of people are aware of how bad that was. But it goes on for the next decade. And it's getting into, now you're getting into MK Ultra territory. You're getting into official MK Ultra 1953 territory. You have Bernays, doing his propaganda stuff. The Nazis were the most sophisticated propagandists in history. Their filmmaking and propaganda filmmaking was the best there's ever been, maybe even to this day. They might have still been better at it than the propagandists are at it nowadays. The Nazis were really, really good at it. So you've got all of that coming over to the United States on Operation Paperclip, which I'm just going to read you this paragraph about Operation Paperclip, because this is a thing that really happened. The CIA brought 1,600 German Nazi scientists, engineers, and technicians. They were taken from Germany to the United States and put in U.S. government employment between 1945 and 1959.
Tons of Nazis in the government.
Yeah. Gave these Nazis, flew them out, saved them from what was happening to Nazis in Germany, brought them to the United States, and gave them government jobs in a place where the government is using Hollywood and all of its newspapers and the ideas of Edward Bernays to manipulate the public against communism, which we know is happening in Project Mockingbird, which starts in 1949. It is another CIA project that is specifically engineered to get into to manipulate people via Hollywood and print media to manipulate people against communism. That is the job of Project Mockingbird, which is started in 1945, and it's created by the CIA. Like I said, I want to jump back at this point now. Since we're at 1949, I want to jump back to the Hollywood sign and tell you what happens here. So the Hollywood sign, Hollywood Lands, has been left by these rich developers, right? And it's basically just junk on the landscape. It's basically just junk. I mean, now people are starting to associate it with these fancy movies and these glamorous people, but on the whole, it's just junk. Nobody's taking care of it. Nothing's been done with it. So at this point in time, but people are feeling attached to it, and they're feeling like it has meaning, having to do with these stars, you know, like Aleister Crowley said, every man and woman, a star, you know, right? These stars in Hollywood, right? So the LA Chamber of Commerce, which is taxpayer money, right, pays to have land taken down. So those last four letters are taken down. So it no longer is about the segregationist land development, and is now about these stars that Aleister Crowley talked about, okay? So it's now about them, and they take the lights down off of it and they repaint it. And it's left there again to deteriorate. And I will say one more thing about it before we leave today. But in 1949, Project Mockingbird is something that really, really did happen. And like I said, MK Ultra officially starts in 1953, and Project Paperclip we're aware of. Now, so let me say this about Mockingbird. So Mockingbird also funded student and cultural organizations. So you have Project Mockingbird, which is intended by the CIA to manipulate the public against communism. This is happening in, so they're going into schools, colleges, manipulating college students against communism. They're manipulating us in Hollywood. They're manipulating us in print media. And this is something they literally did. So So this comes from it was originally discovered that they were doing it in 1967 by in a magazine called The Ramparts. But it was still going on, because it went on until 76. It went on from 1949 to 1976. So almost 30 years when it was official. And this was what finally it gets out. It comes out in Rolling Stone magazine. Carl Bernstein breaks the story. So people, like, even though it had already been broken, it wasn't really until Rolling Stone and Carl Bernstein got on it that the public was upset about it. And this is when Alan Dulles is ahead at the CIA, which he's involved with MK Ultra, right? So this all comes out, and this is when Bush Sr. is also a head at the CIA. He works for the CIA during the time that the Church Committee brings out the fact that Operation Mockingbird exists. So in 1976, though, they officially end the program. Not that it really matters. I mean, honestly, we're almost 30 years in to a CIA manipulated media.
It's over.
It's over.
It's
They
not like
ransacked.
the program ends and it suddenly switches back to normal. It's like they pushed the wagon and now it's going down a hill at full speed towards a pile of children who are playing.
Absolutely, the best way I've ever heard it put. That's exactly what happens. But they do end it in 1976. And I just have to read this because I just love it. It's George Bush Sr. who comes out to speak on behalf of the CIA in 1976. 4 years later, he's the fucking vice president. I want us to understand how close his ties with the CIA were. Like I don't think he quit. You know what I mean? Do you quit the CIA when you work at that level? We're not talking about a receptionist here, right? So we're talking about a head of the CIA. I don't know if there's quitting. I don't know. But in 1976, Bush Sr., because they end this Mockingbird program, which clearly he's part of, right? He's aware of it. But he says the CIA will not enter. I love the language of this. This is so Bushian. The CIA will not enter into any paid or contractual relationships with any full-time or part-time news correspondents accredited by any U.S. news service, newspaper, periodical, radio, or television networks or stations. And I'm like, well, there's so many loopholes in that.
I know!
He didn't say we're going to stop manipulating public opinion. He said we're just not going to pay them. That basically is what he said. At least if they're not the U.S. So yeah, make of it what you will. All right. So
much.
Right. So that's the red tide, which also Kenneth Anger does go over the red tide in here. I don't really think, and then I don't really think there's any more I'm going to go over in this book, but I do hope everybody reads Hollywood Babylon. And I want to say a few other things before we leave today, because I hope I've made the connections that I see between bullshit stories that we tell about who Hollywood is and who these business moguls are and who these politicians are. I hope we see the bullshit.
It just kind of steamrolls and it's really intertwined.
It's really intertwined.
When all of this, the snowball that is so big now started really small because there was less fucking people and there was also less people with access. And it really is, the media is a huge, huge, huge part of all of our lives, and obviously the government is super involved in Hollywood. The media is super involved in Hollywood. It's like the intersection of government, media, and culture. And it's how it gets decimated to all of us. So it's like, so the way it's connected to MK Ultra is basically just because the manipulation machine was kind of like born out of those propagandas.
Yes. And I think, right. And I think as we continue forward with Hollywood and now, in television, because television changed Hollywood once again in the 50s, we have another big shift in Hollywood. People have a television in their homes now. By the 70s, almost everybody had one. So that marks this big shift in what Hollywood did. And since television was run by advertising from the beginning, television was completely run by advertising, not ticket sales. That's not how television worked. They literally, when they figured out, they being business moguls, politicians, really, that's it, business moguls, politicians, figured out what the talkies could do, what advertising could do. Somehow they made this free vehicle that was paid for by advertising and found a way to make sure it got into every single home, you know? So all of it definitely, and that's happening in the throes of MK Ultra. It's happening in the throes of the creation, as we talked about, of the hippie movement, you know, which then, you know, culminates in what I also believe to be a CIA operation of this brutality of the Manson family. So those are all subjects you and I have covered in previous incarnations here. So, and also what I think starts happening is that this magical stuff with Aleister Crowley starts getting used, like the symbols start being used. You covered Bohemian Grove in another one of your episodes, you know, which is kind of showing these business people and these politicians are heavily involved in magic. And Aleister Crowley is present.
And that club started from musicians, actors, playwrights. So they're all together. Obviously, there's still some broke ass artists out there who are cool. Anyways.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the whole thing. I mean, like, it's all mixed up. Like, we don't really, like, you know, I'm not going to stand back and say that practicing magic and surrealism is just part of, like, you know, MK Ultra. But that doesn't mean MK Ultra didn't use it. MK Ultra is using anything to get its hands on. So, so anyway, so the symbols come into all of this, and which gets into like what Plato had to say about the unconscious, which works through these magical symbols. Basic psychology works through these magical symbols, which gets into Edward Bernays and his old double uncle there, whatever that's all about. But two things I want to say before we go today is MK Ultra and all of the things that we're talking about here. This is the picture that we're building here. It has, these things have meaning. These things have purpose. This isn't really, I mean, you can, when it comes to these things, you can throw out names and, you know, dots to connect all day long. As somebody recently pointed out, I feel like maybe it was Kenneth Anger who said, you know who else connects dots? Psychopaths. You know, so like, you know, like you can throw out all these points and you can throw out all these names, but unless you're like building a picture and a point of view, I think it's misleading. And MK Ultra is too important, I think, to just be a misleading game. There is a series of pictures to be created by MK Ultra, and I feel like we're making one, and it's very satisfying for me. I want to say that. So watch out where you get your MK Ultra information from, kids. Okay. And the other thing,
anarchists, please.
Right. And Lucifer Rising is Kenneth Anger's film, which comes out in 1972. I feel like is very influential for a lot of films that you'll be seeing. And I think he's telling us something. And also coming from, like I said, he does the, is he a Thelemite? Is that what they call him? But you know, he's a student of OTO. He is a member of the OTO. So Lucifer Rising has multiple meanings, and I hope you all watch that film. You see how beautiful and awesome it is, and you question what happened in Hollywood after it was made, or before it was made, or why it was made. I hope you get more questions than answers from Lucifer Rising. It's the best 28 minutes of your life. So one more thing. One more thing, the Hollywood sign, just to end right here. So in 1970, it falls into disarray one more time, and I want to show you a picture of it, because after 1949, they don't touch it again. You know, like it was developer garbage was what it was. LA paid to fix it one time and probably didn't really want to do that again, right? So it gets left into this mad disarray, and this is what it looks like if you can see it. It says Hollywood. That's a U. One of the O's are
Oh my
down.
God.
Right. Now
Holy
that's right, Hollywood. So that's which also, just by the way, I don't, coincidentally maybe, like Hollywood itself is something that magicians make their wand out of. That's pretty traditional magic. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if it's a
just
coincidence.
putting
I
it
don't
out
know.
there. Just putting it out
Get
there.
out there. Because even if it is, it probably is a coincidence. I mean, Laurel Canyon, Laurel is also a magical, like those things up there have magical names, maybe. But even if it is just a coincidence, it's probably still working on us. But this is what it looks like. This is what this shit looks like in 1977. Okay, so Hugh Hefner puts together this Save the Hollywood sign and essentially sells a letter off to donors. You know, everybody puts in, I think, something close to like $30,000 into each letter. Alice Cooper buys an O in the name of Groucho Marx.
Oh,
And
corny
good old Hugh Hefner, he buys the Y. So make of that what you will. And
like the vagina thing.
you know, why not? Make it funnier.
Hefner, but I don't know that much about him.
I'm not a big old fan of Hugh Hefner by any means, but you know, I just kind of thought
I
I
love
laughed.
boy bunnies, so I guess that's like when I think about that reality show that they had.
Oh right.
Whatever, I'm just like, I loved those girls.
Well, and in 1978, he bought the Y. I don't know. So anyway, Hollywood Babylon, folks.
That was really cool. I mean,
Thanks for putting up with me today.
I love, I mean, yeah, this has been a really fun journey for me. I mean, I feel like I already, knew that there was a psychic warfare going on against me, but I feel like, everything we're talking about is basically just like parts of kind of realizing like the real depth and organization of like, and I feel like this is something that a lot of people who are conspiracy theorists really agree on, that there's just like magical psychic warfare going on. Like these other podcasts that I don't want to name, but we have been talking about, like, that are also conspiracy podcasts. They all also blatantly say, like, there are leaders that are doing rituals that are trying to get power to control us. And, like, I also believe that. And I feel like all of this stuff just, I mean, honestly, I feel like intuitively, I started suspecting that, like, as soon as all the stuff with Trump happened, because I was like, I literally feel it, and I was kind of seeing it happen all around me, where I was just kind of like, I just feel like I'm seeing a bunch of people around me be like, psychically I don't really know the right word for it, during this specific moment. And during his election, when a lot of people were talking about him like doing certain things that could maybe be like spell casting and whatever. And this is just like genuinely what I believe. And all of this is just kind of part of that bigger story, and all I just want people to know so they can psychically protect themselves, because that's what you have to do.
Absolutely. I agree. Yes, psychically protect yourself. Absolutely. And question what you ingest and what the parts of it are, because sometimes we have movies and things that we feel like are kind of explaining these conspiracies to us, but they're really being made by the people who are creating the conspiracies. So where is if you you know, if you feel like you're watching something that's explaining the conspiracy to you, then ask yourself, where are they deceiving you? Like, what is it they don't want you to see? Because
A
there's a
perfect
reason.
example of that is the Ted Kaczynski documentary on Netflix, which is
Okay.
really, I think, what sparked all of this conversation for us, because because you, after watching that, were like, they don't talk about MK Ultra at all, and he's really in the picture. And then I was like, we should make a video about that. So it really
Right.
is, all of this is stemming from these topics that we're both interested in, that so many people are interested in, but that are being presented in a way that's really not true and is actually really manipulative. Like the fact that that documentary doesn't talk about MK Ultra at all is incredibly manipulative, knowing what I know now that I learned in our video.
I agree. I agree. And like, you know, you can find that probably in anything that you're looking at. And you know, and fiction films also, and fiction shows that seem to show you the matrix, so to speak. There's something in there that's turning you in a direction they want you to look. There's some, you know, I mean, if you're, as long as you're going that deep into the conspiracy, you may as well not stop. I mean, if that's your belief system, then don't stop. Look for the place where you're being deceived every time.
Mm-hmm. How are we deceiving people?
So far, I'm trying not to, but who knows? It's just my opinion. You know, like, like Kenneth Anger is just a tabloid writer. Jesus was just a parable speaker, right?
I don't know. I feel like we're just trying to be real.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I would totally. What do you think we're going to do next? Aleister Crowley? Is that our next topic?
Maybe we could. You know what I kind of think we should do is that 2.0 hexon stuff that we just found, and I bet you Crowley.
Well, oh right. I guess that could be part of this series. But I guess thinking about all of these things tying together, I would definitely be interested in Crowley's topic. But we should definitely do a video about that amazing tarot deck that you found, or that Super V Fun Cat found.
Super V Fun Cat sent us. Yeah, yeah. So we'll take a look at that. But okay, Crowley, let's do it.
We're going to do so many more videos because I love talking to you and you're so smart. And everybody,
you're so smart.
Everybody should say thank you. Okay, so I guess I'll stop this recording, but we'll still be on the line with each other. Okay. Anybody who watched, I will marry you. And like and subscribe.